This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Patrick Scahill in for Lucy Nalpathanchel. Batteries are everywhere, from the toys our children play with to the phone you might be using to listen to us today. We even popped a battery in a helicopter that recently flew over the surface of Mars. But what's behind the silent tech that's powering our lives? Today, we're exploring batteries, our reliance on them, and what the future might hold for this technology. You can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Our guests today are Penn, energy correspondent for the New York Times, and André Taylor, associate professor in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at NYU Tandon School of Engineering. And Ivan, today we'll start with you. And I'd like to begin by talking about the way long-lasting rechargeable batteries are getting more and more important in our lives. I don't have to tell anyone listening to the show that batteries today are everywhere. Ivan?
That's right. Of course, we began in the part of the space dealing with our cell phones and things that we use almost every day now with lithium-ion batteries. But of course, Elon Musk popularized electric vehicles today. It's not a new technology, but we have focused on lithium ion as the source, the power source for electric vehicles. And now we're in this energy transition that's being pushed to move us from fossil fuels to electric vehicles. So they're playing a substantial role.
President Biden recently highlighted electric vehicles and the need for charging stations in his infrastructure package. Ivan, tell us a little bit more about what the president says he'd like to see there.
Yes, so in order to make this all work, the president realized that we needed to have more charging infrastructure. If you're going to convince people that electric vehicles are a reliable source for them to use, you've got to give them the ability to charge their cars. And so what he wants to do is to add thousands, tens of thousands of chargers across the country to help sort of facilitate this growth in electric vehicles. Typically right now, majority of the people who've been still probably call them early adopters, charge at home, but you're beginning to see more and more chargers everywhere from, the grocery store parking lots, the mall parking lots. You're seeing them, you see them at Walmart, you see them at IKEA parking lots. They're proliferating. But the question is, can you convince the average person that there is enough ability? If I live in an apartment, if I and there aren't chargers in my apartment building, if I am a renter in any type of housing situation, what do I do if there's no charger there? So the president, in trying to address that, has been pushing for thousands of chargers around the country.
And getting those charging stations online, Ivan, as you're saying, is going to be essential if the U.S. wants to meet its carbon reduction goals, because consumers do want to have the confidence that they can find a spot to plug these batteries in to charge them. I know that has been an issue here in Connecticut. The state has a pretty ambitious goal of putting about 125,000 EVs on the road by 2025. We have less than 20,000 registered EVs in the state right now. And part of that, according to state officials, is this range anxiety, this worry that, if I go out, if I take my car out, I'm not going to be able to find a spot to plug the battery into.
That's right. So you typically, you can get 400 miles, or in some cases more, off of your gasoline vehicle. And it's only been in the last year or so, maybe a couple years, that we've started to really see electric vehicles that can go the 250, 300 plus miles. And those have been, again, typically a Tesla. Early on, you were having these electric vehicles that were getting 40 miles a charge, and that created this whole, as you described, anxiety, range anxiety. Will I be able to get to my destination? And quite honestly, even people I have spoken to in the last several weeks who even have Teslas and fairly new ones still have that concern. If I go, they'll say, I'm based here in California. If I go from San Diego to visit family in San Francisco, and especially in a more rural area, sort of outside of the Bay Area, will I be able to find a charger to get back home? These have been real concerns for people. And so if you have more chargers, and particularly fast chargers that can charge in less than an hour, as opposed to, in some cases, it could be 3, 4, or even 5 hours to charge, that helps to relieve the anxiety. But it's not like the less than 10-minute moment that you will spend at a gasoline station.
So we're going to be talking a bit about maybe some of the future evolution of batteries as we go further on today. But André, I want to turn to you, and maybe we'll just go do a quick kind of chemistry 101 here. Maybe you can talk me through, in really basic terms, what exactly is a battery? What's sort of the basic science here about how these work?
Sure. Yeah. So the battery is basically made of 3 major components. You have your anode, your separator, and your cathode. So your anode, that's your negative side. That's where your electrons flow out. Your separator is what separates the two sides apart. And you have an electrolyte that's used in between. And then your cathode, which is your positive side, this is where your electrons typically flow in. And so the idea with the battery, it's been around for a while. And I guess the terms for batteries was first coined by Benjamin Franklin in 1749. And he coined the term. And of course, back then they used the term loosely for battery. So anytime you had the component of systems that worked together that did the same thing, so you could have a battery of ammunition or a battery of artillery, those sorts of things. He took a group of capacitors and called it a battery. And so that's where the term formed in terms of the formation of a battery. And then if you move forward in time to 1780, Luigi Galvani, he was dissecting a frog and had a brass hook in in the frog. And when he was using the iron scalpel, he noticed that the leg was twitching. And he thought that this was energy that was built up into the leg. And it took his assistant, Alessandro Volta, that he actually recognized that it's because of the 2 different metals making the connection. And so later on, Alessandro Volta, he published a paper in 1791, went on to create what they call the Volta pile, which is this series of zinc and copper interacting systems, which created a battery type of system. And so this is the onset of the battery. And so then we move fast forward to the current times of batteries now.
And one of the major batteries now is the lithium-ion battery. So just sort of briefly explain what that is.
Sure. So lithium-ion battery, so batteries are typically named by the mobile ion. So in this case, lithium is a mobile ion that shuttles across. And for people that are interested in the lithium-ion battery technology, the 2019 Nobel Prize in Chemistry was given out to John Goodenough, Stanley Whittingham, and Akira Yoshino for their invention of the battery in 1985. And the lithium-ion battery was commercialized by Sony in 1991. So essentially, they were looking for a way, and this was during the oil embargo and the challenges there. They're looking for a way of having some sort of high energy density battery system that would work better. And, of course, there was lots of trials, lots of attempts, and people were scanning the periodic table looking for the best elements. And it turns out that lithium works out really well because it's, number 3. So it's it's the lightest of the metals, but then also has a higher power, has a higher energy density than other batteries as well.
And so, Ivan, maybe describe the way that the lithium-ion battery has become popularized in technology today. You were describing Elon Musk and the work he's been doing with electric vehicles, but I'm sure it goes beyond just electric cars.
Absolutely. So batteries and energy storage is sort of viewed, pardon the cliche, but sort of the holy grail in the energy sector. The idea of being able to store the electricity, is a key component to how we move the electric grid to the future. So if you mentioned the president working to decarbonize the energy sector. Obviously, part of the goal is to do that with more solar power, wind power. But these function best when the sun is shining. Obviously, solar doesn't work at all with no sun, and the wind turbines depend on wind. So, in those times when those sources aren't generating, you need something to keep powering the system. And so, if you can use storage of some sort to capture excess solar, excess wind in the times they are generating, then that becomes another element to keep the system reliable. Storage can be the lithium-ion battery, but then there's a century-old technology that we've been using in storage, hydro power plants. They have been sort of a critical piece. Hydro pump storage has allowed us to store electricity. So it's not just a battery. It could be a hydro power, pumped hydro plant. It could be other technologies beyond lithium that help us to store electricity for the grid. So not only EVs, but even for the power we use for our homes.
Well, and I understand, Ivan, out in California where you are, that state has actually relied on battery power in the past, coming from individual homes to help deal with some grid stress that you've seen out there in recent years.
That's right. Of course, last summer we had the first blackouts since the 2000-2001 energy crisis. Related specifically to issues with the grid. Of course, they've had they've cut people's power in the midst of wildfires, but this was blackouts because they were having issues with the electric grid. What happened in that case was you have rooftop solar on individual homes and businesses, and batteries at those locations that allowed the grid operator to be able to harness that power and supplement the lack of electricity that was being generated by the wholesale power producers and the utilities with this battery that was in someone's home or a system of batteries at a business. This is a lot of the future of this technology.
We're going to take a quick break here. This is Connecticut Public Radio and Where We Live. I'm Patrick Scahill in for Lucy Nalpathanchel. You can join our conversation on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Our guests today are Ivan Penn, energy correspondent for the New York Times, and André Taylor, an associate professor in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at NYU Tandon School of Engineering. We'll be back after this. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Patrick Scahill in for Lucy Nalpathanchel. Lithium-ion batteries have become ubiquitous in the world of technology, powering a computing revolution that's given us cell phones and electric cars. But the ways we get the raw materials for our batteries have raised many questions. Joining me to talk this through is Ivan Penn. He's energy correspondent for the New York Times, and André Taylor, associate professor in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at NYU Tandon School of Engineering. André, we spoke last segment about some of the components that go inside a lithium-ion battery. One of those components I understand is cobalt. So again, a quick chemistry 101 for me here. Tell me what cobalt is and why it's an important part of lithium-ion batteries.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so cobalt is an important component for batteries. So it's used in the cathode part of the material, but of course, there's some challenges with cobalt because of the scarcity, and then also on how it's obtained. And so people are looking for other type of alternative cathode materials. Of course, you don't want to have a trade-off in terms of the capacity, because of course, with the battery, the higher the capacity, then the more the battery is going to operate. You also want to have a material that's not going to have any memory, and memory meaning that if you discharge the material, then it's going to remember the discharge state, and then it's not going to recharge. So it's going to lose capacity in that way. So you want something that is going to be able to operate, cycle, time and time again. So you have a long durability. So now people are looking at other types of materials for the cathode. So LMO, which is lithium manganese oxide, that's a very popular system that people are studying, and actually my group is doing some work on LMO right now. There's also other types of cathodes as well, lithium iron oxides that has received some popularity. And again, there's different challenges for each of those, because for batteries in your cathode, your lithium ion migrates, and they call it the rocking chair mechanism. So your lithium ions migrate from your anode to your cathode. And so as they migrate from one to the other, they intercalate into that cathode material. And so then there's issues with expansion and contraction, and how well that material can be cycled.
One other issue that I know I've been aware of, André, as someone who knows virtually nothing about batteries except what I'm learning today, is that lithium-ion batteries can, in rare cases, catch fire if something happens inside the battery. So my understanding is cobalt can maybe mitigate some of that, and that's why it's become a popular component of batteries? Yeah.
So back when I guess when Stanley Whittingham proposed the battery layout, and Akira and John Goodenough, they were working on this. So John Goodenough introduced the idea of using the cobalt in for batteries, and that's one of the things that said, okay, wow, these batteries can actually be stable, and we don't have to worry about the fire, because of course having an unstable system and one that falls out of control is not good. So that's one of the components of it, which made it such a conventional material. But then again, there's issues with cobalt, in terms of how it's obtained. There's only a few limited places that you can get cobalt. And then again, it's the cost. So cost has a very big function in that as well.
Mm-hmm. So Ivan, let's turn to you, and maybe we can start by talking a bit about cobalt, and then we'll talk about lithium mining and how we get lithium. But André mentioned there are only a few spots in the world where we can get cobalt. So walk us through that process. How is this element obtained?
So one of our major sources of cobalt is in the Congo in Africa. And so you end up with a number of concerns in that regard, that in both environmental as well as just the human impact of the mining. So the concerns become really, really significant, sort of the classic environmental justice kinds of concerns. And so there have been a great deal of efforts, as André is mentioning, and even at our national labs, to reduce the amount of cobalt that gets used. The government's goal has been, the federal government's goal has been to get that down to 5% or less, or even to try to eliminate it altogether, because of those environmental and environmental justice kinds of concerns.
Well, and some of those concerns were outlined in an excellent Washington Post story, which chronicled some of the work that so-called artisanal miners were doing in the Congo. And these are essentially miners, Ivan, who are going in using hand tools into tunnels they've dug themselves to get this element out, often at great risk to themselves, and in some cases using child labor as well.
That's right, but not only are we talking about the concern about cobalt, but about an actual lithium itself.
Mm-hmm.
So the various elements that are going into the battery are of concern. Lithium, in particular, majority of it right now comes from South America and Australia, and some of the mining techniques that are used, they have serious environmental concerns. Some are these large evaporation ponds, so they're using large amounts of water, and then all the processing right now is virtually done in China. So there's concern about. You also have some of the economic concerns that the government is trying to deal with, but those kinds of environmental concerns, in some cases, traditional mining, blowing up a mountain, these are all, things you have to weigh, even in this transition to what we're calling clean energy.
And I know, Ivan, you've done work on investigating some of the major projects that are under development currently in the United States. There's the Lithium Americas project in Nevada that was greenlit in the last days of the administration of President Donald Trump. So maybe tell us a little bit more about that site, what mining would and what mining would look like over there.
So we have multiple sites that have potential for lithium mining and development here in the United States. In the case of Lithium Americas, part of the concern was the fact that some of the traditional mining and again, blowing up a mountain, as one person said, is not, in many people's estimation, not considered, an environmentally friendly way of doing things. But it's not the only technique that's being looked at here in the United States. There's multiple ways of extracting lithium. One, as we reported, talked about the use of a technology where you take it from the brine of geothermal that you find in Southern California, for example. These are basically tiny volcanoes, and they're generally used. The geothermal is generally used in that area to power plants, but the salty water also contains a lot of minerals, lithium being one, and you can extract it without blowing up a mountain. Some of these areas are also on native lands. There's concern about the water. And so you have a lot of issues, even within the United States, in terms of mining, about protecting the environment, protecting the drinking water. So can you use more of the technology of taking it from something like geothermal to that provides a potentially safer way of extracting the mineral?
André, I wonder if you can talk about, as a researcher, how you think about the way materials are sourced, and the way that's factoring into how engineers and how scientists are thinking about the future of batteries.
Yeah, thanks. So we definitely think about how materials are sourced, and my research group, my colleagues' research groups, we are very concerned about the technologies that we have and how that affects the environment. In terms of sourcing of materials, it's interesting because with lithium ion batteries and extraction. So as Ivan mentioned, where does that lithium come from? And so now there's pressure in the United States. So most of the lithium comes from, as Ivan mentioned, either Australia or from Colombia, specifically Bolivia. And so they take this in South America. They take this lithium, they pump it out, and it sits out on these huge lakes, and it just evaporates from the sun. And then they extract the lithium. And of course, in Nevada, there's lithium that's down in the groundwater. But then when you talk about issues like the Salton Lake, then what does this mean? Okay, so they can harvest energy, they can take the geothermal energy, they can generate electricity from that method. But at the same time, if I'm going to pump out this brine solution, then when I extract the lithium, what do I do with the wastewater that's left over from that process? So those are things that we think about. And so the Department of Energy has been running a number of contests and calls for researchers to come together to try to think of ways creatively to extract lithium and figure out ways that make the most sense. And so that's something that definitely my group works on and focuses in on. And one small point that I wanted to mention from the previous section, when you mentioned decarbonization, at NYU, we have a center for decarbonization. And this is it's called DC Muse. It's the Center for Decarbonizing Chemical Manufacturing Using Sustainable Electricity. So this kind of couples in with the grid parity. And in this case, our center is focused on the chemical industry, which focuses in on chemical processes. And we're looking at ways on how you can decarbonize that and look for methods to do that. So this is NYU plus several other universities, and we have support from the Sloan Foundation to put that together. And so these are things that we definitely, as researchers, are concerned about in terms of how do we make our technology and how do we use that technology for the good without having an overall negative effect on the environment.
And what about the question, André, of reusing the technology that we've already made? What are scientists thinking about when it comes to recycling lithium-ion batteries and the components that go into them?
Yeah, so for recycling, that's an interesting challenge, because recycling, and then how do you take that, and what's the I guess what's the window of the recycling that you could say? So in battery technology, for example, for the older Prius cars and some of the hybrid cars, those use nickel metal hydride. And so for nickel metal hydride, for those batteries that are coming to the end of their life, there's a huge reservoir that's building up. Of course, it's going to peak because now, hybrid cars are using lithium battery technologies now. So in terms of recycling, then what does that recycle stream look like? And then how do you extract those materials? And that's a complicated challenge, because most of the time we're used to extracting things from mining, putting it together and putting it in. But then how do you take an existing component, and then extract those materials out of it? And that's a part that scientists are working on and thinking about in terms of how to do that. Our group, my research group, focuses on looking at improving the batteries, improving the battery architectures. We haven't focused on recycling lately.
And Ivan, I know you've looked into this issue a little bit in terms of your reporting. And I mean, I can just say from personal experience, if I don't have a spot to recycle something, I'll tend to just maybe keep it in my house. If it's say paint or something that I know is hazardous that shouldn't go in my trash bin, until I can find a spot to put it. And I've done this with lithium ion batteries. I mean, I have old batteries or old laptops that are just kind of sitting in my closet. So I'd imagine a certain degree of political pressure or leadership will be needed here, Ivan, to sort of incentivize cities and towns to put out recycling spots for this stuff.
Yeah, this is always the question. We develop a technology, and we on the back end start trying to figure out what we're going to do with it after we decommission it. There's always that debate about nuclear power. We developed the plants, but we didn't spend time figuring out what we were going to do with the spent fuel rods. And so the question also came up, well, if we're going to dramatically increase the use of lithium ion batteries, what are we going to do in terms of with all those batteries that are left over. And you have some companies that are emerging that are recycling the batteries. And then some folks are saying, well, we talk about mining. Why don't we focus on recycling some of those minerals from the batteries? But when you consider the demand that we're talking about and the shift from fossil fuel, from gasoline vehicles to electric vehicles, you're talking about such a large amount of lithium that's going to be needed, a large amount of minerals that's going to be needed, that you're not going to be able to get all of that from just simply from recycling at this stage. And so part of the issue is that, just to be able to meet the goals, how we handle all of that. But it's unfortunately oftentimes a second thought about what we do with all the stuff that we develop.
Mm. Well, and I know you've spoken with a lot of auto industry leaders. So what are you hearing from them in terms of, how much consideration they're giving to the ethical concerns here around things like material sourcing as they're ramping up electric vehicle production? I mean, are they paying attention to where the components for these batteries are coming from?
Well, there's obviously a great deal of concern when you have the amount of pressure that's being applied around the world to decarbonize. The auto industry is increasingly responding to that, with some of the automakers, saying that they're going to phase out gasoline vehicles over the next decade or so. And of course, the sourcing becomes a critical issue in that some of the folks at the Salton Sea, the developing the lithium there from that geothermal, they have reached agreements with automakers to get their lithium, or at least some of their lithium, from that source, because of the concern about what types of mining techniques are being used. So, I mean, it's in people's minds, absolutely. But, there's a trade-off here. There are environmental concerns over most technologies that we use. It's just that some are much cleaner than others. And so, it's making the choice about which one you're going to pursue.
Coming up in the next segment, we're going to be talking a bit about the future of batteries and some sort of alternative types of batteries that are out there. That's Ivan Penn. He's energy correspondent for the New York Times. We're going to take a quick break here. We're also speaking with André Taylor, associate professor in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at NYU Tandon School of Engineering. I'm Patrick Scahill, in for Lucy Nalpathanchel. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. Join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. We'll take a break and be back. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Patrick Scahill, in for Lucy Nalpathanchel. Today we're talking about batteries. We've spent time exploring how they're made and how they're used. Now we'll look at what might be next for batteries and some of the cutting-edge ideas for how they're made. Joining us today is Ivan Penn, energy correspondent for the New York Times, and André Taylor. He's associate professor in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at NYU Tandon School of Engineering. And you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, André, I want to talk to you a bit about sodium-ion batteries. So explain what these are and some of the work you're doing on them.
Sure. So sodium-ion batteries, so sodium is the mobile ion as opposed to lithium-ion batteries where lithium is shuttling back and forth. So in the case for sodium batteries, you have the sodium that's migrating from your anode, between your anode and your cathode. And what makes sodium-ion batteries attractive is that they don't have as high of an energy density as lithium-ion batteries, because sodium metal is heavier if you look on the periodic table. But in terms of cost, sodium is very, very abundant, right? You can take sodium, you can harvest it from the ocean and all sorts of locations. And so For electric vehicles, maybe lithium batteries is the better technology because you have a higher energy density, gravimetric energy density for mass. But for sodium, if you could have a very stable battery that's low cost, now you can talk about something that can address some of this grid parity that we were talking about earlier with the grid. And so people are looking at sodium battery chemistries for that. And my group, we published a paper in Anguate Chimie International where we used asphalt. And so using asphalt, which is, if you think of asphalt, that's a waste material that's used from petrochemical refinery. And so they take the asphalt and they put it in roads and things like that because it's very, very cheap. We actually took asphalt because graphitic carbon in sodium batteries are not very stable, whereas you need a new material for the anode. So in this case, we're using asphalt, which works really, really well, surprisingly. And so now you're taking a material that's dirt cheap, that's considered a waste material that's put in roads, and now we're saying, hey, this material can actually be used for renewable energy storage for sodium battery chemistries.
You had mentioned sodium-ion batteries possibly being one avenue in the future that could help achieve better grid parity. I wonder if you can maybe talk a little bit more about that and some specific examples that you could see in the future where sodium-ion batteries could help close that gap.
Sure. So sodium-ion batteries, as Ivan mentioned, there are different entities, I guess, that are contributing to the grid. And so there's a lot of, not only like for electric vehicle range anxiety, but there's also grid anxiety, because if you have a lot of variable renewable energy that's connecting to the grid, then that can cause instability. So when we go from this distributed energy type of landscape where you can have these entities, so in terms of like a stable grid, you could have these stable nodes. So you could have electricity generation and storage all in the same node. So if something gets cut off or anything like that, now you don't have to worry about the whole grid shutting down or anything like that from the conventional way that we have it. And so these sodium batteries and energy storage schemes function very well, because now if you have renewable energy, and so if you have like your windmills are generating electricity, solar generating electricity, when those are running, you can store that energy. And then when you need that energy during peak power demand, where you might not necessarily have renewable energy taking place, then you can extract that energy and use it. So that affects the grid parity.
Well, and Ivan, I wonder if you can maybe talk a little bit more about sort of that idea, maybe in the context of microgrid. So this is something, as an energy reporter here, that I'm familiar with the concept of a microgrid, but maybe just describe in basic terms what a microgrid is and how batteries could play a role in propagating those.
Sure. So, and I guess maybe to answer your question, describe sort of the three kind of categories that we have. So, I mean, on the large scale, what we're used to getting our power from the utility company, the utility scale power producers, the big box, whether they're natural gas plants or, we increasingly phasing out coal plants or nuclear plants or large solar farms, wind farms. And then on the other end, we have the rooftop solar on my house, or a battery in my garage, or solar on my business, battery at my business. In between those two, from the large scale and the micro, in between the smaller, I will say, in between them, we have a microgrid. So it's a combination of it's not quite a solar farm where you have rows and rows and rows of solar panels, but it's a series of panels that's larger than what you would see on a home, and it may be coupled with a battery and supply maybe a development, or maybe you might have a microgrid at a school or a hospital, but it's not the utility scale size that's powering tens of thousands of homes and businesses.
Well, and one of the things that really stands out to me as you're talking, Ivan, is that I think batteries are often thought of as the province of maybe people who are better well off, maybe someone who's an early adopter or a gearhead and can afford a high priced electric vehicle. But you reported on one of a really great example of the power of this technology, and this was an apartment complex outside of Salt Lake City, Utah. And at this complex, I think it was about 600 units. Every unit had its own battery, and there were solar panels on the roof of this building. So essentially, it was kind of a microgrid, as you're describing.
That's right. I mean, so again, we're talking about sort of how the future of how the grid operates. That complex had solar panels on the roof of the apartment building, and every single unit had its own battery. And the way that the state sort of helped make this work even better for the consumer, because obviously people who can't afford to buy their own home, typically are the ones renting an apartment. That battery was essentially theirs. As they leased the apartment, they got the full benefit of that battery. And so the way that played out was to say, if the grid went down, then I'd still have some power in my apartment. If the grid needed more power, they have sort of coined this term, a battery swarm, where they harness the power from all 600 batteries and send that power to the grid in the same way that we talked about earlier, where batteries at homes and businesses helped during that blackout period last summer here in California. So that is a true microgrid, and its ability to do multiple things that the electric grid, when it was designed a century ago, was not designed to do. I mean, it was designed to deliver power to us, but not this now two-way relationship that rooftop solar and batteries and microgrids have enabled.
André, one of the things I know you've looked at is solar panels on vehicles, and again, that being a way that could maybe close some of the gaps here and maybe incentivize people if they're a renter and don't have a spot to plug their EV car into. If there's solar panels on the car, they don't have to worry about that. So maybe just briefly describe some of the work you've done there.
Sure. Yes. So my area of research is organic photovoltaics, and so this deals with the area in solar cells on polymer small molecule solar cells, and my group also works on perovskite solar cells. That's a next generation material solar cell, and most recently we're also starting to work on CAD-TEL solar cells as well. So very exciting time for solar cell technology. And so if you can imagine, for people that have electric vehicles and they're trying to figure out, okay, where are we going to plug into? What are we going to connect to? And then with the deployment that Ivan mentioned, with the number of charging stations that are going up. And then, of course, the questions that come up with that is, okay, will this charging station charge this particular vehicle? Will Tesla with their charging stations be accessible to other vehicles and those sorts of things? Well, you can imagine having an electric vehicle where you have a solar panel that fits on that conforms to the coating or the contour of the car, and not just like one of those rigid type of panels where you have like a box that's sitting on top of the car, but something that actually seamlessly covers the car. And so now, instead of having paint that just protects or makes the car look a certain way, now you have a active surface area that's actually collecting energy. So you can drive your electric vehicle, then when you park it, it's still collecting energy. And I think that's a very interesting situation, because now the car is autonomous or can be self-sustaining, where you don't have to necessarily plug it in to a grid or to a charging station. So my group is working on those types of solar cells, which are flexible, bendable type of solar cells.
Ivan, earlier you were describing microgrids and some of the behind-the-meter energy storage that people are doing in their homes. And you're describing really what sounds to me like maybe a turning point for the grid. I mean, you were saying how the grid was set up a century ago to do one thing, and that was to deliver power. But now we have people that are on the grid actually generating their own power. So maybe just sort of sketch out where this could all go from here.
Sure. So, I mean, some of it we're seeing actually in other parts of the world. The ability to, because those with solar and battery, solar on their rooftops and batteries in their homes, because they have this power, it gives the opportunity to turn them into entrepreneurs. We see some of this in Germany, where you have some peer-to-peer electricity trading. It's not as complicated as people would think, because in some of our states we already we can decide who our power provider is. The utility delivers, but we pick who the provider technically is. And so Germany has taken that to the micro level of where if you were in my area, I could sell you some electricity that I produced from my system. So I mean, there's the potential is very broad, where you can actually turn everyone into an electricity entrepreneur.
Mm. And André, our time is really brief here, but just in closing, I mean, for you as a researcher, what are you seeing as I guess kind of the frontiers for batteries going forward? What are things that just excite you in your research?
Oh, great. Thanks. Yeah. So there's a lot of exciting things. So my group is working on fast rechargeable scenarios, looking at ways on how you can make batteries charge faster, because of course it's one effort to, if you have an electric vehicle, to find a charging station, but then there's also that idea of you don't want to be sitting around for a couple hours for your battery to charge back up over to 80% capacity. So how do you actually make that battery and where you can charge it up much faster? And so we have some exciting results. We have a manuscript that we're preparing that we're going to publish pretty soon. And so I'm looking forward to that. Another area that batteries that we didn't really talk about is, of course, you can decouple the capacity of batteries. And so you can create a variety of different scenarios called flow batteries. And so flow batteries, you can have electrolytes, analyte, catholyte that's flowing in. And that helps with the, with the limitation of batteries, because batteries, you're limited to the capacity of the amount of material that you have. Whereas with flow battery, you can decouple that. So you can have solutions or storage, and you can increase your storage and then just have an energy exchange system in the flow battery. Other areas for batteries, my group's done work on lithium air, lithium oxygen batteries, which is eliminating the challenges. So instead of using lithium metal oxide in the cathode, you're actually letting oxygen come in from the atmosphere, and then that's forming like a lithium peroxide or superoxide on your cathode side. So there's a variety of areas with that I think makes sense. And yeah, so I just think it's a very exciting frontier right now for batteries, flow batteries, and then not just that, but grid storage. So as I mentioned, DC Muse with the decarbonization of the chemical industry, how do you take those electrons and put those into chemical bonds? You can store that in chemical energy using other systems. You can create ammonia, getting around the Haber-Bosch process, all sorts of interesting things you can do electrochemically. So it's a very interesting frontier right now.
I want to say thanks to both of our guests today, Ivan Penn, energy correspondent for the New York Times, and André Taylor, associate professor in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at NYU Tandon School of Engineering. Thanks so much to you both.
Thank you.
Pleasure
for having me.
I'm Patrick Scahill, in for Lucy Nalpathanchel. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. Today's show was produced by Carbon Baskoff. Thanks for listening.